Okay, I would like to introduce to you Susan Greenhalgh. Susan Greenhalgh is from Free Speech for People. She is one of the organizers of this whole speaker track here today, but she's also a speaker herself, and she's going to be talking about what are claimed to be risk-limiting audits in the swing states of the last election. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay. Thank you for joining us. You've heard a lot about the importance of paper ballots and post-election audits because inherently elections systems are computers. Computers are inherently vulnerable. So the way that we don't try and fix all the vulnerabilities, we're going to make the system resilient by ensuring that everybody's vote is recorded on a paper ballot, and then that the election results are going to be audited after the election. So we had concerns about the audits that were done in the last election and wanted to kind of really dig in and look more closely at what was actually done, because we keep hearing, don't worry, the elections are audited, don't worry, the elections are audited. And there's been a lot of research also into how do you do election audits better, but there's also hasn't been a lot of research into the quality of those audits and the kind of those audits. So that's what we wanted to look at. And so that I and David, who just left, wrote a paper together called "Don't Just Trust, Always Verify," and this is the presentation about that paper. Okay, we're using computerized systems in everything. They can malfunction, they can be misconfigured. That's why, as I mentioned, we have this idea of evidence-based elections that people have been reiterating over and over again if you've been here yesterday and earlier today. And that we shouldn't be deciding the elections on procedure. Uh-oh. David? Could you ask David to come back because the screens went dead? Oh boy, I'm sorry about that. Oh, okay. We're back, and we're back. Okay. Sorry, sorry, we had a little technical issue. Okay, so how effective were the audits in the swing states in 2024? So we looked at these states, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. And we wanted to, in this report, we look at the reasons why you really need to be doing audits, why they're so essential, and do some review of some of the information that you might have heard yesterday if you were here, and we also looked at some of the myths about election security, because sometimes I think the imperative of having a post-election audit gets diminished if people think that the systems themselves are so secure. So we looked also at these different myths that assert that the systems are more secure than they might be, that the voting systems undergo rigorous testing, pre-election testing, and certification. We also gave some examples. We've heard some of them earlier today about errors where the wrong candidate was determined the winner, and then when people actually went back and did a full recount of the paper ballots, they found that the machines had counted the votes wrong and that somebody else was the winner. There was the incident in Northampton County, Pennsylvania, where the votes were being recorded incorrectly on the ballot marking devices. What was recorded in the barcode didn't match the human verifiable votes. We have a list of these which show that even if you have pre-election testing, there's ways that it can fail. Another reason why post-election audits are essential is that even though we hear voting machines are never connected to the internet and they can't possibly be compromised because of this, this in fact is not true. There are machines in some states that use wireless modems to transmit their election results from the polling location to the election management system on election night. That means both. And the election management system is the system at the county level which aggregates vote totals. It also programs machines before the election typically. So that both ends of that that transmission are exposed to the internet. But there are other states, there are some states that do not permit wireless modems. They have very rigorous standards around not connecting your voting machine to the internet, like California, New York, Texas, Colorado. But even in those states, that doesn't mean that your system is locked down and can't be compromised, because at some point it needs to receive information about ballot definition files, and that's generally transmitted to the individual machines through a USB stick from a machine that may be connected to the internet. So there are other vectors, and we don't want to just discount and dismiss those and assume that just because the machines aren't connected to the internet, we don't need to do audits. In 2024, if you were here yesterday, we talked in great detail about the fact that voting systems in several states were accessed improperly by partisan operatives, that machines made by both Dominion and ES&S were accessed and held for many months, and the software was extracted from the Dominion machines and shared with a bunch of people. So this actually made the imperative for post-election audits even greater in 2024. And these are the states where the software was taken. If you saw the talk yesterday, you know a lot more about that. And then it was shared through a share file site to a network of supporters of Donald Trump. So that was not something that was done to take software and put it up on GitHub and allow for security researchers to do more with it. And to understand what the vulnerabilities were so they could be improved. We don't really know what happened to it because there wasn't an investigation. But we do know that this, as far as what is known, this was the most serious election security breach that we've seen in the country. So then we wanted to look at what are the criteria for effective post-election audits. And we're talking about an effective post-election audit that achieves or aspires to provide evidence-based elections, meaning that your election result generated from your computerized machine is based in evidence of voter intent that is collected sufficiently to confirm that the computer-generated results are accurate. And so there are things that you would want to see in that audit if it's going to be effective in providing evidence. One, is it conducted before the election results are certified? Because if it's conducted afterward, what's the point? You haven't produced any evidence to certify your election based on. Are the audits mandatory, or can they not perform them for whatever reason if they choose not to? And then this is a very important consideration, and if you've been here earlier this morning and today, one of the most important elements of an effective post-election audit that is going to provide evidence of the results is that you have a trustworthy, reliable record of voter intent. And the best way to provide that is by hand-marked paper ballots. If voters need some sort of assistive technology, of course that should be available to them. But that their votes can be verified, and that ideally you don't want those votes recorded in a barcode if someone needs assistive technology, but the most direct way to capture voter intent is with pen to paper. And there's been more research into this, and this is something that I hope is a major takeaway, that you need to have that record of voter intent. Yesterday, Philip Stark was up here. He has done some more research into this question of, can you actually effectively audit an election if you're using a computer to make the record of voter intent? He's written a paper with Rich DeMillo of Georgia Tech and Andrew Appel from Princeton that Martha alluded to earlier this morning. Do ballot marking devices assure the will of the voters? He's also done some other work with Andrew Appel in a paper called now it's going to elude me. Trustworthy record of voter intent and then audit. And so the state of the art of auditing has advanced from where it was a number of years ago, where people thought, well, you can audit from that paper that spits out from a ballot marking device, from a computerized ballot marking device sufficiently, that's going to be enough. But what the experts are telling us now is that paper trail is not reliable enough. And they go into more detail about it. I'm not going to get into it now because of the time, but if you're interested in that question, check out those papers. I can tell you more about it. But so that's a really important element of the question of how effective are the audits. Do you have that original source document of voter intent? Are the audits conducted by hand? As Martha mentioned, sometimes they do the audit, and in Florida now they're allowed to just run that ballot marking device the ballot that has a barcode, in through another scanner and count from the barcode. Now you're not counting from what the voter verified, you're counting from something the voter couldn't actually read and saying that you've audited the election results. So you're auditing that the machine counted the votes the same way the auditing machine counts it, but you're not actually checking did the voter's intent get captured and counted correctly. Are the ballots, machines, or races selected at random? Because we have seen incidents where sometimes election officials don't want to have to expand an audit if there's discrepancies. Some states' laws say that if you see discrepancies, you're going to have to expand the audit, which makes sense, and that's another criteria that we have here. And to avoid that potentiality, there have been incidents where they have pre-sorted ballots and used and essentially ensured that you wouldn't possibly have to expand the recount by pre-selecting precincts that they knew would count up correctly. And are the categories of, are all categories of ballots included? Meaning, are you including military and overseas, or UOCAVA ballots, absentee, provisional? If you start excluding segments of the ballots in the universe of ballots in the audit, that's going to diminish your effectiveness of the audit. And if somebody did want to play games with your election, they could just target those ballots. Are the audits conducted publicly and the data results made immediately available for public review and verification? And this, again, is important to do your audit and publish your audit before the election is certified, because if you're keeping that information private, people don't know that maybe they want to call for a recount if there's a lot of irregularities or discrepancies. And then finally, do the risk limiting audits that we see and are told about, because everyone talks about risk limiting audits being the gold standard, actually meet the requirements for risk limiting audits? So the summary of the findings in the bad news is that 2 states, Michigan and Wisconsin, published their audit results months after the certification. Michigan conducts their audits. They did them by the county level. Some of the counties have published some audit reports. Some have not published anything. The state has not published anything yet. In 2020, the state published their audit report, I think in April of 2024. I'm sorry, pardon me, scratch that. In 2020, Michigan's Department of State published their audit report in April of 2021, so about 6 months after the election. Wisconsin published their audit report this year. They counted actually more ballots than any other state. It hand counted their ballots, but they published it in, I think it was March, they published their audit report, even though they conducted the audit before certification. And Wisconsin's audit doesn't provide a lot of details. As I mentioned, Michigan, we have, at this stage, we don't really have a lot at all. Wisconsin gives you a summary of what they found, but they don't show you how many ballots were counted here, what the discrepancies were. They summarize it all, and you just read the interpretation of what the Wisconsin Election Commission provided. Furthermore, none of the states that conducted RLAs, being risk-limiting audits, Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, that claim that they conducted risk-limiting audits actually meet the baseline requirements for an RLA. Most significantly, all of those states use some sort of electronic device for most in-person voting, so the majority of their ballots that they have to audit don't really provide that trustworthy record of voter intent that is necessary to audit your election results meaningfully. There's other issues with the way the RLAs were conducted. So for example, in Pennsylvania said, well, we conducted a risk limiting audit, but they did it on the state treasurer's race, and they did not do it on the presidential race. They did not do it on the Senate race, which was contested. That was a much closer election, and so there was no risk limiting audit done on that. Pennsylvania also does a what they call a 2% statistical audit, where each county has to choose either 2 precincts or a certain number of ballots where they recount them. They can recount them either by hand or by machine. And if you're recounting those ballots by machines, it says that you have to use a different machine than the machine that you used on election night. So for example, if on election night you used precinct-based scanners in this precinct to count those ballots, you can now count those ballots by central count. But if both of those machines were programmed by the same election management system from the county headquarters, if there is some bug, malfunction, or potential malicious activity, it's going to have the same problem. So there are other deficiencies in the audits that are done in Pennsylvania as well. In Nevada, we saw very little information about their audit. It's kind of, if you look at it, it's a scant document that doesn't really tell you much. So there's not a lot of transparency there. Oh, I already went ahead of that. In North Carolina also has a 2% audit, but again, because of, so if you have a large county like Mecklenburg County, it's got about 500, I think they had 580,000 ballots were counted there, but they only audited 1,200. Now, if you're doing a true risk limiting audit where you're incorporating rigorous randomization, that might be a small enough sample. But if you're not doing that, which is the case here in Pennsylvania, you're just looking at a small number of ballots. I'm pointing this out not to say I can say definitively it was insufficient, but that it's not 2%. It's less than 2%, even though that's what it's called. And Nevada also has on its books that it does a 2% statistical audit. But I called Nevada, I looked all through their website, I emailed them, I asked them where the information is about the 2% audit, and they just kept referring me back to what the RLA is. So if you look at the laws, like an election law database, and say, oh, well, they're doing this audit and they're doing that audit, it seems in practice that Nevada isn't actually doing that audit because they seem to have replaced it with the RLA, what they're doing, what they're calling the RLA. Okay, summary of findings, good news. Arizona actually conforms to a lot of the best practices needed to provide evidence. Their audits are mandatory, they're before certification, they randomly select everything. It expands if there are discrepancies, but this is a little bit flawed because the only way it expands is if every county that race has the people voted in for that race also expand. So let's say one county sees discrepancies, they have to expand their audit, but the next county over doesn't, and it's a congressional race that spans 2 counties, or you're talking about the presidential, unless every county does their expands their audit to a full hand count, it can't possibly replace an incorrect machine count. So that's something that could be improved. So there's some room for improvement, but they post a lot of the information on, so you can see the actual tally sheets for the audits. There's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of best practices there that other states could look at. North Carolina also has some of the same best practices. Also, audits are done by hand count. They're before certification. They're randomized. They can be expanded. They don't give as much detail as Arizona, but they do give accounting for what they've audited. So I think what we wanted to do was kind of understand how strong these audits are that are actually being conducted. And what we found is that they're really not providing a lot of evidence and that they really need to be improved. We need to be doing more rigorous audits, looking more at the paper ballots, and confirming the election results before they're certified, and pushing for those sorts of reforms. So now I can go to my last slide and see if there's any questions. Hi. Oh, we do. Let's get a microphone to you.
When they're doing hand count ballots, doing the audits, do they have a Democrat, Republican, and/or an independent if available that are both looking at it, or is it just here's a stack for one person, here's a stack for another?
So every state's audit procedures, that if they do hand count, it's going to be different. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you who's doing it that way, but that's a good best practice to have. But yes, that is one thing that people do. I'm sorry I don't have that level of detail on this. Yes?
Wait so I can get you the mic so that our recording picks it up, please.
In the list of issues that you had in, I think, your second slide, I didn't see anything related to voter intent, but the previous presenter showed voter intent issue. Do we have any kind of good basis to understand how much that might affect results?
I think you're talking about, are they auditing from the voter intent or from the barcode, or what?
Essentially, I'm trying to separate in my mind between, hey, like on that first slide, it was like double counting of districts and things like that, which are sorting and categorization problems, versus the voter intent issues of these ballots are rejected because obvious voter intent, but it was counted as a double count, or it was counted as not voted, or something like that. Like, do we have some way of separating the size of those two issues?
In terms of the audit, or in terms of the problems with the machine? I guess I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble.
I'm sorry. I'm focusing on trying to focus on how much the results may be affected. I guess that's a little bit less about audits.
So I know that again, every state handles their discrepancies differently. If they can determine that voter intent, and you mean that the scanner counted it wrong if somebody filled in the filled in the bubble incorrectly?
Something like, yeah. I mean, you had a couple of slides where you're specifically focusing on the fact that we have bad system, or potentially bad systems, especially when we summarize a vote to a barcode or something like that, that doesn't preserve voter intent. And I'm trying to understand the magnitude of that issue in terms of total votes to the count.
I wouldn't have any way to quantify that.
That was what I was asking.
Yeah,
We don't have
sorry.
a quantity on that, is what I'm hearing.
Sorry.
We don't have a good way of quantifying how bad that problem might be.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe somebody does. I didn't look at that.
Just a couple of quick questions. Michigan does do RLAs. Did they not meet the standard, and is that why they weren't in the slide?
So Michigan did an RLA in 2020 after the election. They published a report on it, and they said they weren't able to get full participation with all of the counties. So the Secretary of State's report said that they considered it an exercise to learn more about it. She can pilot them, and she has said that she's piloting them. She didn't pilot one in 2024.
Okay.
They did pilot one in 2020. They didn't get enough participation. You can look it up on the website for the 2020 election. And she didn't have enough participation, so they couldn't establish a risk limit. So, and Philip might know more about that. But
I think they are still piloting them, but setting that aside.
there's nothing published if they are published,
Sure.
so there's no public information about it.
Fair.
So as far as providing any evidence, there's none. And one of the requirements of a risk limiting audit, if I will speak for Philip, is that it be conducted before certification, so it can potentially overturn an incorrect vote count. So if they're working on them now, I don't know how that can be called an RLA.
Yeah. My other question is, you had Nevada as listed as as having almost all their votes done by BMD.
Yeah. Well, BMD and DREs.
Well,
DREs with VPN.
45% or so of their voters vote on hand-marked paper.
In 2024,
Yes.
45%?
Yeah. Every Nevada voter gets a ballot in the mail.
Oh, but they don't all vote them that way.
No, but 44% of people in 2024 did. So, according to like a quick Google. So I could be wrong, but
Okay. Well,
just throwing that out there.
Hi. So my question really relates to the audit and where we are today as far as how we vote. So when I'm looking at audit criteria, it's basically based on let's vote in person, let's vote by ballot, but we don't address the electronic part of it, and that's what you hear in the news. When we go to do an audit, and you had somebody at a high security clearance, why couldn't they also audit the machines at the same time to make sure that the machines are outputting what they're supposed to? Because those could be audited as well. And that's what you had the breach on with those guys that illegally took the source data in the machines. So do you see legislation coming or criteria coming to when you're doing an audit, you're also randomly pulling some of your either scanners or voting machines to make sure that what was put in is the output?
So there's a lot of limitations to doing those type of machine audits. I don't know if you were here yesterday when the Texas election director, when you say audit, I'm assuming you're talking about some sort of hash testing or either parallel testing. So she talked about the fact that they found that the hash tests were flawed in Texas, so the script that they had been given, and they were getting false positives that the hash matched even though there was nothing to match. So there are a lot of limitations to hash testing as far as it can check a certain version, but it isn't really a protection to ensure that the machine is counting correctly because, and this is part of the problem with logic and accuracy testing too, is that all of these computers have calendars in them and they have dates on them and clocks. Malware can be devised to only act on a certain day and not to act on other days. And if that's the case, then you're pulling it after and you wouldn't find anything anyway.
A forensic guy would. I think if you have
No, not necessarily.
we can discuss, but I was wondering where it's going. Generally, we can, if it was in, unless they've erased all traces on their way out, a forensic guy should be able to find every little bit of artifact within that machine every time it's touched. We can even do a hover.
I think.
But we could talk about it more.
Yeah, Matt talked about software can eat itself too, so
Yeah.
It can disappear itself.
We can find some of that.
I think this is going to have to be our last question.
Last question.
Yeah.
I hope I make it good. How do you square making sure like an effective audit is done, that the votes are correctly counted, right? But also making sure like that the information gets out as quick as possible, because the longer you go, the more distrust in like the public eye of the outcome of an election, right? Like if it takes like 4 or 5 days, right, to say, hey, candidate A was leading at the first day, and now at the end of day 5, candidate B is now winning. And there's a lot of room for people on the losing side or the winning side during that to like come up with, I guess, conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you what my ideal would be. I don't. This is not going to be something you'll see anytime right now. But when I first started this work about 20 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about who should be doing the audits, because should the election officials be doing the audits? Because if you have a publicly traded company, you don't have your the publicly traded company do its own audit. They have an outside entity come in to tell the shareholders what's actually going on. So do you have audit boards appointed by, the governor and the legislature, independent people that are going to do the audit? I think that one of the solutions to address what you're talking about is to have independent audit boards that are not exhausted from running election, that can come in and then do it in a shorter period of time. Because part of the problem is election officials have just run themselves ragged, worked like crazy to run an election, and now they're expected to audit the election, and they have to have some time to be able to do that. So I don't know if that's a practical solution to your question, but that's what I would like to see. And I think we have to end it there. So thank you, everybody.